Kathy from Greenville. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for coming out and joining us. Can you start off by describing your childhood?
Actually, it was a really good childhood, except my dad committed suicide when I was 5 years old. And that left me with a lot of anger, which I didn't know where it was coming from. And so I was angry a lot and mad and didn't listen very well. I was kind of rebellious. And all through my life, I was like that. And at 17, a friend of mine turned me on to some pot, marijuana. So I started smoking that, and oh, I loved that. That was wonderful. And it took me out of my thinking, because I couldn't figure out why. When you go to school and everybody else has their parents and you don't, that's upsetting. Sorry.
No reason to apologize. Did you, at any point in time, did anybody offer you any counseling services?
No.
Anything like that?
No. And I'm 70, so when I was 5 years old, that's 65 years ago. And there wasn't a whole lot of counseling back then. And my mom especially, she didn't really talk to us about it, And back then, that was kind of like a embarrassment of the family. So she never really talked about it, and you can tell she was hurting. But it wasn't until years later that I found out that he actually committed suicide. I don't even know where I heard it from, but I know that. And then I found newspaper articles, and that's what happened. And at 17, a friend of mine, like I said, turned me on to some pot and took me out of my grief or whatever I was going through, my anger.
Right.
So I started doing that, and the next thing I know, somebody was offering me some pills to take, and those seemed to help a lot. But I wasn't doing it on a daily basis, just maybe like on weekends, because I was still in high school. But then at 18, I ended up getting pregnant. And that didn't work out so well either, because the guy that I got pregnant by denied it was his. And he had 2 other kids by a girl he was living with. So I said, fine, I'll do it myself. Well, at first, when I had him, I gave him up for adoption. But then 2 weeks later, I said I wanted my son back. So they gave my son back to me. Well, it was good for like 3 years. Well, my husband, he wasn't my husband at the time. He was in Vietnam. So when he came home from Vietnam, he was strung out on heroin. And we got back together again because we had been together, broke up, been together, broke up, your typical teenage stuff. Well, and I had my son, and we started getting into the drugs pretty heavy, and I was strung out on heroin. He was strung out on heroin. We ended up, both of us, going to jail, in and out of jail constantly. And this went on for like 5 years. And when I was in jail, I had to spend a year in jail. I called the Children's Services and to give my son up for adoption. I wrote him a letter because I knew I didn't want him to end up like me. And at that time, I didn't have God in my life at all. So I didn't know where I was going to turn to. I didn't know if I was going to go back to the drugs, or I just didn't know what I was going to do. And I wanted him to have a good home. So that's what I did. And so I gave him up for adoption. And when I got out of jail, finally, they came and got him to take him to his new home. So that left me devastated. Why did I do that? And well, then both of us, we was clean for a while, but then back on the drugs again. It's real easy to get back into drugs when you're around a bunch of people that do. So there was a killing at my house. A guy that we knew, who's a friend of ours, got murdered there by another guy that was coming over our house. And me and my husband were the innocent ones. But he went back to the penitentiary because he was on parole. And he went for a parole violation. So after all that happened, I just said, we just cannot do this no more. We got to get away from this town. So I had an aunt and uncle that lived in West Milton, Ohio. And I asked him if I can come down and stay and get a job. And he said, sure, come on down. So I did. And I got a job at the country club, and I worked there for a year. And when my husband got out of the penitentiary, he came with me. And then we got an apartment, and things were going great for like 5 years. And he got hired at Fram. I got hired at Fram, and life was great. And even though I didn't have my son, I knew hopefully he was in a better place. But I had kept trying to find him, and I couldn't because the records were sealed. So I just kept praying and praying that someday I'd find him. Well, like 15 years we were clean. Well, I shouldn't say clean. We used to go over to the bowling alley and drink beer and party a little bit after work and, still smoke, but we never really got into the heavy drugs until he found a doctor down in Dayton. And the doctor down in Dayton was giving out Oxycontins. So he started shooting drugs again, keeping it from me. And I noticed his arms, and I asked him, I said, are you shooting dope again? He said, no. Don't lie to me. I've been there. I know what it looks like. So he fessed up and said, yeah. Well, then at first he tried to talk me into doing it again. I said, no, I've had enough of that. I don't want no more. Well, it didn't take long, and I did. We was like that for like 5 years, and our relationship was not good. It was fighting all the time, back and forth about drugs and all that. Well, one day he went out and went to go see a friend, came home. He was stoned so bad he couldn't even hardly walk. Well, he went on the bed and laid down and got on the phone. I don't know who in God's world he was talking to, but he was on the phone. So I thought he stole some of my drugs out of my purse. So I was out in his car snooping around. Well, then he wakes up and comes out there. He said, what the F you doing? I said, nothing, I'm looking for my CDs. And so we started arguing and stuff again. So I said, I don't want to talk to you. I'm going to bed. Just leave me alone. So I went to bed. And so I didn't hear no more from him that night. And then the next morning I woke up. I went out in the living room, sat in a chair, and I kept looking at him, and, he didn't look right. So I called his name, and he didn't wake up. So I went over there to shake him, and he was cold.
Wow.
So, I know. So I had to hurry up and call 911, call my brother-in-law, Tony, his youngest brother, and he came over, and they couldn't revive him. They took him to the hospital, and that's where they pronounced him dead. So then my whole world flipped upside down. And I'm thinking, now what am I going to do? I'm strung out on these Oxycontins. And, I started buying people's prescriptions. And I was strung out like that for a year after he had passed away. I almost lost my house, my cars. If I would have, my job, if I would have lost my job, I would have lost everything. So then, and I would isolate myself. So I would lay in bed and cry and beg God to take me. Please take me out of this world. I didn't want to live. Because after my husband died, 10 months later, my mom died. And she was my rock. Well, she died. So I didn't want to live. So, but you think he'd listen to me? No. Instead, he guided me out to St. Rita's Hospital. And in Dark County, we had that recovery place. So I would walk in there and I told them, I need some help. And they says, well, what's your problem? So I told them I was addicted to Oxycontins, Percodins, Vicodins, Xanax, anything I can get my hands on, actually. Oxys. And so they said, okay, you go out to St. Rita's, you be out there for a couple weeks, 10 days, and come back and see me. I said, okay. Well, they kept me out there for 21 days. And then when I came home after 21 days, I had to grieve all over again because I was so medicated when all that was going on. So I had to grieve all over again. And I started going to recovery because they tell you to go to meetings, 90 days, 90 meetings. So I did. And I was struggling with these meetings because, you know, especially in a little country town, a lot of these people, you know, men and women would have these meetings, and eventually some of them would start hooking up together. Then they'd break up. Then there was bickering back and forth over the tables. I'm thinking, I don't need this. So I just went back to church. And I've been clean, you know, since 2001.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And that's who saved me, God.
And so what types of things do you do to support your recovery through going through to church?
Well, I'm a Stevens minister. I do Kairos. Well, and I've been on Emmaus walk. I don't know. A lot of people might not know what the Emmaus walk is.
Okay.
But the Emmaus walk, this is where I first started my journey. You spend 3 days, 72 hours at church, and it's all about God. You spend your time with God. When you first go on the walk, you're called a pilgrim. And they have people giving talks, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. When I come out of that, I was on cloud 9, and I knew God had a reason for keeping me around instead of just letting me die. Because he didn't answer he wouldn't let me go. So I started doing the Emmaus, and then I started being on teams. And a friend of mine invited me to go on a Kairos. And a Kairos it's like the Emmaus, only it's in prison, women's prison. And you sit at tables. They have like 8 tables, and with 9 people, 3 of us are clergy or a pastor. And we just talk to the girls, and they have talks over the course of the whole weekend. And food, we feed them from outside in, we bring it in. And I just love doing that. And now I'm getting ready to do another Emmaus walk. So I've been involved with Emmaus and Kairos. And, when I come out, I says, I got to find out what my purpose is. So I started going back to EUM on a regular basis. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out what my purpose was until it just hit me. My purpose is to spread God's word through my addiction. So that's what I'm doing. And
It's a beautiful story and such inspiration. So can you talk a little bit about how you worked? So you mentioned that you had to work through the grief that you felt with your mother dying and your husband dying, and the suicide of your father. How did you work through those traumatic events in recovery?
It was difficult, very difficult, but God just gave me the strength to work through that, and help me to understand that my dad was sick. He was an alcoholic, and back then they didn't have a whole lot of help for alcoholics, 65 years ago. And so, if, a long time ago, I used to blame God for taking my dad, and then my grandfather was a big part of my life, and he took him, and so I was angry on that. But I just keep turning to God whenever I have struggles. And I know He'll get me through it.
Absolutely, because being able to share that strength and being able to share, we come from all different backgrounds, but there are different pathways that people can find freedom, and they can be happy, and you can feel joy, and you can work through grief and trauma and whatnot, and there is a way.
Yep.
There is a possibility.
Oh, yeah.
So, were you ever able to reconnect with your son?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I kept searching and searching and searching. Even when my husband was living, it wasn't his son. And he would try to help me, but when the records are sealed, there's just no way. And so I even called up the adoption agency in Youngstown and asked them about getting a hold of him. And they told me I can put my name and address and all that information and give it to them, and if he goes looking for me, then they can give it that to him. Wow. So I just kept praying and praying and praying. Well, then one day I went out to lunch with a friend of mine, or dinner. So I came home and I was looking on my emails, and I got this email saying, hi, he says, if you know Kathy Kennedy, which is my maiden name, he says, can you please get a hold of me? He says, if not, he says, I'm sorry to bother you. Oh my God. So he had all these pictures. He had a picture of me and him at his birthday party at my grandmother's house. Him sitting on my grandmother's lap at my mom's house on the side stoop. He was sitting there, and a couple different pictures with him at my mom's house. And I just started bawling. So I hurry up and text him. I said, yes. I said, I'm Kathy. He said, can I call you? I said, yes. And so I gave him my number, my home number. And he says, okay. He says, I'll call you. I have to go get my daughter some lunch. I'm thinking, oh, thank you, Jesus. I got a granddaughter. So he called me, and we talked. The first time we talked, it was like 8-9 hours. And this went on for like 4 days. We was up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning talking. And I told him everything. Anything you want to know, I told him. So then we finally ended up getting to meet. And I wanted to meet back up in Youngstown where all this took place. So we did, and it was wonderful. And he came down to see me a couple times. So, and now he has a new grandbaby. He's like 53 now, and he's got a little one, and he's 3. And he lives out in Lancaster, so I want to go out there and see them. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's very cool. And those are the, amazing experiences that do come to fruition.
Yes, they do.
And you being able to be present and being able to be alive.
Yeah.
I mean, thank goodness.
Yeah. And he didn't even know if I was going to be alive. When he started looking for me.
Right.
And my granddaughter, she's just as beautiful as can be, and so I'm so excited.
That's wonderful. So could you share, are there any words of hope that you could share with somebody who's struggling?
Yes. Just don't give up, and seek out the help. If you got to go to a church, even if you don't belong to a church, go to a church, talk to the pastor, tell them you need help, or get a hold of me somehow. I'll be more than glad to help. Point you in the right direction. There's so many people out here that want to help people that's struggling and that are addicts. They just need to reach out. You can reach out to me if it's on Facebook. Reach out to me on Facebook. I'll be more than glad to help.
Yeah, fantastic. Is there anything that we missed that you would like to share with us?
No, other than God's good. Saved my life.
Wonderful. So we really appreciate you coming out today. Your story is beautiful and amazing, and I'm sure it's going to help so many people that are out there and they're alone and struggling. You are proof that there is a way out of addiction and freedom in recovery.
Yes. Just never give up.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.